Oh, hello, good evening, everybody. This is my second YouTube live. I'm no stranger to doing it on Facebook, and I'm glad to see that the people who support me there liked my last live, which was on YouTube. So that's an encouragement to continue. These are experimental, and I'll see whether I want to carry on with them or not. I thought. It was important to come on and say something because obviously there's a lot of problems with people in lockdown on their own, and it seems as though the suicide rate has gone up in the UK, if not all over the world, because people are trying to cope with really difficult issues at home, invariably alone with nobody else to help out and figure out what to do. So I'm actually a filmmaker, and I have been for the last 25 years. Prior to that, I was a student, and I got a history and politics degree, full degree. During that time, I was elected as the welfare officer, academic affairs officer, and eventually as the vice president of the Students Association. And as part of that job, I had to deal with people's academic appeals and sort out anything that went wrong with their lives. There at Stirling, it was a bit more difficult because it was regarded as the university that always had the highest suicide rate in Europe. You know, I can sorry, I can remember. Excuse me, it is live, and I can remember being told about this suicide rate. I'm warned about it as a student welfare officer. And of course I asked, well, how many suicides are there? And in fact, they didn't want to say how many suicides there were. But certainly I noticed that it was at least one or two a month, if not more than that. And obviously, if it's a community of 1,500 people, maybe less, 2,000 at tops, one a month is a lot statistically. And if it was presenting as three a month, if you were an employer or a big organisation and you lost three, two, or one a month employees over a year, certainly now with the new legislation about this in place, eyebrows would be raised. So Stirling did, want to do something about it, and they made a lot of changes to what they were doing in order to obviate it, bring it down. Anyway, during my tenure, I brought the suicide rate down to zero, so much so that I got an award. Well, I was nominated. I didn't get the award. I was nominated for Scotswoman of the Year for bringing the suicide rate down to zero, from it always being there. And, what the principal said was that, the first year it could have been a fluke. The second year that it was zero, not so much a fluke. The third year, it wasn't a fluke. So I must have been doing something that was a little bit different from other people's approaches to this. And during lockdown, I started to think about it. What was I actually doing? What was my system that created this blip in their statistics? I decided to write down some of the things that I was doing or recommending that people did, right? So, first off, I was dealing with the problems that they had. That isn't in their head because, people go on about suicide being a mental health problem. Well, I never judged anybody to have a mental health problem. And I always realised that that was a stigma that nobody needed on top of all the other problems that they had. So I called it a crisis, and professionals in mental health wouldn't say somebody, wouldn't stigmatise the person that they're trying to sort out by calling it either a mental health problem or anything other than just a crisis that you needed to sort out. So, straight off, I didn't come to it with any superiorities that I needed to label what was wrong with them. And I think that's very important. On top of that, I also would make no judgments, not consider they had any mental health problem, and I would solve the problems. I would attempt to go through every single thing in the first sitting with that person. All those things that were causing the problems that they had in their life, from the course obviously needed to be saved. So the academic appeal was commenced. I would listen to what it was that they had that needed done, and the reasons that they felt they had failed or they were not performing or couldn't get to the place, the place of work, to the lectures, etc. Invariably, it was social reasons. It was either that they were under threat of homelessness, hadn't had enough money from the grant, they were in debt from the last time, the last term, etc., etc. So invariably, it was an income-related problem. So, appeals would be made to the grant authority. Normally, if a person did it in time, there were some people who didn't, and yeah, they would go on and have bigger crises, out with the term, which, sadly, I wouldn't have been able to do anything about that. So, I tried to catch people when they were there, but mostly. So, number one, why am I telling you this? So, if you're stuck in lockdown, you need to deal with the problems you're facing. Don't hide from them. Don't sit and watch TV all day and avoid it. You need to write the list and then try and, call up the authorities. So if rent is late, call them up. Don't avoid it. Don't wait. If you need to change your job and you have to go on housing benefit, go and do that or make that phone call. Go on benefits. They're obviously, the problem is that, which has got a stigma with it as well, clearly, or apply for that grant. In my case, I'm a filmmaker, and we obviously do what we do, and we're employed. So I, when the lockdown happened, I applied for the grant that that the government was giving out, for self-employed and students, well, not students, self-employed and companies, and we successfully got that. So, that's what you need to do, is do it right away. So don't hide. And if you're having difficulties with those applications, get somebody who can talk it through with you. There's a time to, to say, well, that should be filled out, etc., etc. I mean, most people will be able to do these forms themselves, but sometimes people get panicky and can't. So that's why you need an advocate. So you need to get yourself an advocate. I was an advocate for students, and that's what I did successfully for those number of years. I did that. The other thing on the list I've written, because I've written a list, and this is sort of a moving feast, as it were, of different tips and things that you need to do to avoid feeling bad or getting suicidal thoughts. I did put in the byline that was talking also about the film industry, and I do that with a bit of trepidation, because they're always very, very unable to deal with their own problems, because their publicity machine would deem them not to ever have any feelings or problems or negativities like that until obviously it's too late, until that they're found and they've expired, which is multiple things in the film industry. The famous suicides, etc., that we all know that we've read in the news about, etc. So that industry actually has the highest rate of suicide socially, alongside writers, artists, and other creatives. They have a 1 in 4 chance of committing suicide compared to other people. So, their mental health, they should be dealing with their mental health and trying to do things about it before it gets too complex or difficult. So I've written down 9 points, and I will try and race through them. Do need a drink of water, cranberry juice. And so we know that prior to the lockdown, in the film industry and entertainment industry, suicide had reached epidemic proportions. I mean, professionals were raising eyebrows about what's actually going on in that industry. Why is this happening? So anyway, I've said I'll go back to my list. Point number 1 was deal with the problem. That's usually income related. Stop everything if your income has changed, and deal with that and make those phone calls. The second thing I wrote down is something that certainly wasn't available 30 years ago, but at Stirling University, they were developing it. So if you like, they were kind of like a guinea pig for how to improve mental health and how to prevent suicide, because it was an issue that they were dealing with. And they had one of the best sociology departments in Europe. And in fact, they were studying behaviouralist therapy, right, in sociology, which has now become common day, but it wasn't. They were developing it, and that's cognitive behavioural therapy. So I would recommend in modern day times now, when you can get a cognitive behavioural therapist at the drop of a hat for a variety of issues, that you would be looking at getting one of those counsellors. I mean, obviously, there was a professional backup student counsellor, so I would always refer my, person that I was seeing to a counsellor. Once I had ticked all the boxes of sorting out their income-related issues, which I always dealt with first. And the reason for that is you want to be looking at the 4 things that provide you with heat, light, electricity, food, home, all your physical things that provide you with life. Yeah. So they have to be provided for. And so it's not your mental health that needs sorted out at that point, it's your living circumstances. So I often look at agog with these people that get on and say all these tips, you should do this, do that, happens that. No, sort the problem. Once you've dealt with the physicality of the issues, then you go on to looking at cognitive behavioural therapists. Get one of those. And the reason for that is cognitive behavioural therapy is about changing the way the brain reacts to its own thought pattern, right? So cognitive behavioural therapy is about creating positive images and ideas in the person's mind in their approach to issues in their life, as opposed to having a tape recorder in your brain which is always giving you negativity. Oh, I feel I'm really bad, I can't do this. I don't want to face it. Some people come with an imprint which is very, very negative about themselves, low self-esteem, and usually that's been passed on by parents who, maybe were brought up in that kind of Victorian thought pattern, which is, people are born with sin and they're all negative, etc., etc. You know the problems. So cognitive behavioural therapy has been developed and is very successful for changing the pattern of thoughts in our minds away from habitual negativity. How that is done is through a series of different mechanisms to change how you think. It's not easy, but once a person is aware that they have a negative thought pattern, they pretty much can pull themselves up every time they say, I'm bad, I can't do this, etc., etc. So, cognitive behavioural therapy does that. That's what it's all about. And normally it is very, very successful with treating, it's very successful in treating addictions, alcoholism, drug addiction, smoking, you name it. And the reason being is because you are training your mind away from the negative thought that made your mind request that drug or alcohol in the first place. Right? See what I mean? Because they're crutches to get through the problem. Most alcoholics, if you ask them why did they drink, it's because they didn't like themselves. So they did it in order to forget, to get into that state that would make them not think about their problems or thinking they're a bad person. You see? So what cognitive behavioural therapy does is it changes that way of thinking and prevents the person from then thinking about alcohol being the way to do this. I'm not saying it's easy, but it gets better as you go down that track. The other thing that a cognitive behavioural therapist will do, and I think I must have been doing it before cognitive behavioural therapy, which was, I would, cognitive behavioural therapy is different for each person because each person has a different set of problems. So the counsellor will go through what it is that needs to be fixed in your life and talks it through as to why you have a block. What is the block to that thing? Why are you not able to, achieve something that should have been fairly simple to do if you're a student? You go to your lectures, number one, and then try and remove the blocks. And a prescription from a CBT counsellor, as it's called, would be different for each person. And the complicated variety of the scenarios for that person would be completely different for each person. Okay, so once you've got a counsellor, now obviously you can get these from just calling up your GP, I think now. Although obviously mental health this is the other problem. You can't actually, because they don't just at the drop of a hat and you have to go on a waiting list. But cognitive behavioural therapists are available privately. And usually in Britain, they would cost about, if someone was in crisis, I would recommend they pay the £50 to speak to a cognitive behavioural therapist over the phone. And if they can't afford it because they're on benefits, so, I would be saying to their friends, pay for them to get that talk with that counsellor, because they're trained to deal with how to change the thoughts of somebody who was suicidal or somebody who was an alcoholic, etc. And they know how to do it. So, I would recommend that right away. And my number 3 is try to remove technicalities that are holding you back in becoming self-sufficient and self-reliant. A lot of reasons that people feel bad about themselves and feel suicidal is because they've got low self-esteem, and they feel bad that they can't do something, or they didn't achieve something, or they're dealing with lots of regrets. So this is probably quite a difficult thing to achieve, which would be removing the technicalities that are holding people back from self-sufficiency and self-reliance. Now, that is a tall order, but you can start it in the process as you've activated the income issue. You can then activate that idea. What is the backup thing that person needs to do to become self-sufficient and self-reliant? Maybe they need to change their job or add something else. If they can't leave the job that they've got, they can add something else to their income, or they maybe need to extend, for example, the activities around a hobby that might generate an income eventually. And hobbyist things are actually very good for people. And sadly, sometimes a person's hobby, sorry, noise in the background, a person's hobby is often the very thing that person really wants to do, except they don't have the money, or they can't get the course to do it. So, I would advocate that they think about moving towards courses that will improve their hobby, and in some cases, maybe somebody who has a hobby and is good at it should consider going professional. That's one thing, but it might take them 2 years to become professional. But, as a CBT counsellor, you would be putting that into the solve the problem that makes you feel bad, or that is not allowing you to support your family. Yeah. And the next big thing, and again, people in lockdown can start to think about that in themselves, if they're losing a job, or, with the film industry, I'd say fight it. I mean, my particular situation is I'm waiting to see if I can get a film into the Odeon chain. So that was delayed because of the lockdown. So there's nothing, I can't change that situation. That's the other thing. Be aware of things that you can change and things that you can't change. I can't change that. That's nothing to do with me. That's an outside factor. So I just have to wait until things improve and we get a release date from that lovely comedy holiday, which I would recommend, people watch, because it's got a feel good ending and it's quite funny, and it's okay. It gets there. Anyway, I digress. So, what was I saying? I was talking about hobbies becoming professional as helping people to move on to the next thing. That's a thing to consider. I don't think people in the film industry should consider moving away from their profession. I think they should stick at it and wait and see how the vaccines go, and bide their time, and in the meantime diversify into other different parts of the industry, but stay in the industry. Anyway, I haven't even got to number 4. I'm racing ahead because I feel as if I'm racing ahead with time. I'm 25 minutes nearly. It's a long thing I'm talking about. It's suicide prevention, so please bear with me on this. It's not going to be... It is the hardest thing to talk about this because of the stupid stigma that goes with it. And yet, most people in their lives will have considered it at some time because things got so complex and so bad for them, or so alone, So that's when you want to think about it. Point 4. I'll just go to point 4. I've written down here, avoid codependency relationships if possible. Enablers who keep you there and keep you stuck in either addictive practices or other things like unsuitable work, right? So that is really hard, dealing with codependency relationships, because it might be your husband or your wife, or it could be somebody in your family. You can't really unravel a codependent relationship right away, and it could take you years to do that. I wouldn't recommend doing it in lockdown because it is too complex. I would keep that until you got another more positive codependent thing, which could be things like your cognitive behavioural therapist would be a positive codependency, your yoga teacher, or something that is going to make you feel better and make you feel good. So some codependencies are okay to have, but yeah, addictive ones, no, you want to be changing that. So people who are with people who are taking drugs or alcohol, you want to be avoiding the alcoholic. Plain and simple. And right now they would be going through lots of issues where they had hidden their alcoholism, but in lockdown, if they're with a family, it's going to be pretty clear what's going on. And a person who was going to be a friend to them, where they're causing havoc in lockdown, is going to want to be saying to them, I think, wouldn't this be cheaper if we paid for your first cognitive behavioural therapist session and considered trying to figure that out, than imposing alcoholism on the rest of the family, etc. I know, but alcoholics won't give up. I mean, my experience of at Stirling, of trying to help them, is complex, and they will go through the best places. And I would recommend other people for that. Is Russell Brand's course is very, very good. I would recommend that people visit his websites and look at what he's doing and read some of his books in lockdown, to consider that, because his 12-point course, although it's obviously based on Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-point system, um, it's more developed than that, though, because Russell Brand gives you a spiritual road out of it as well. And it would also be for people who don't believe in God or don't believe in a higher force. But, it'd be good for somebody who wasn't wanting to go down the Alcoholics Anonymous route. You see what I mean? I mean, I used to have to deal with people who were at Stirling, who needed to go on what they call the pills to prevent their alcoholism. And that's very, very complex, and I've even seen people in DTs, where they're stage 4, and you don't really, that's not very nice to see that. Once you realise that people inflict that upon yourselves, you wouldn't ever pick up a drink in your whole life again, because it is a really serious thing, level 4 alcoholism. Terrible, So yeah, that is number 4. Avoid codependency relationships. Number 5, and this is a really good one, and some therapists put this at the top of the list. And more, yeah, probably in lockdown, it's one that you want to implement for yourself. Remove feelings of shame that you are not worthy, right? In lockdown, you do want to have supportive things around you, but throw out the idea of being shameful, or feeling ideas of shame about yourself or others. Just say to yourself, I am not, and shame is something you can wake up in the morning and your first thought is that of shame, right? Now, it's very important that you try to not have that in lockdown. So if somebody is waking up in the morning and the first thought they have is shame, again, you want to be doing a CBT thing, which would be to remove the negative thought and replace it with a positive one. And it doesn't really matter what rituals you go through to do that. When I gave up smoking this year, and arguably the hardest year to do it in, but I had successfully done it 6 weeks before 4 weeks before the lockdown. And I thought, I'm determined that I'm not going to make this human event that's happened, the pandemic, start me up smoking again. So what I replaced it with was I took the Russell brand advice and I tried meditating. And oh my God, I was useless at it. Now I've got it down and I do it, but I had to adopt some ritualistic ways to get myself, obviously, off the cigarette, and then do things like light a candle, positive thoughts, positive affirmation, isn't it? And I would do certain things that would help me, like fortunately I do believe in God, so saying prayers was a given for me. So I would say prayers and read writings and have that kind of affirmation. Although the meditative part was still a mystery to me, and I'm still learning about it. And, the previous one that I did yesterday, the day before, I read out about the Ayurvedic approach to that. So I hope we'll go back to the previous one because I do have some advice there about breathing exercises for meditation. Which when people are unwell, it's anybody facing COVID, I'd say a breathing exercise is a very important point of survival, to learn to breathe in, and meditation involves breathing correctly. So if you look back at the last one I did, the last live I did, you will hear what I have to say about that. So that was number 5, remove feelings of shame. And then following on from that, 6, don't compare, you are there. Basically what I'm saying is don't compare yourself to other people and their achievements. If they got there and they're brilliant A-listers, they did that because there was something that they overcame pretty much. They probably, were activating themselves, very highly motivated, to get into a position of being an A-lister. And it's not a lifestyle that's for everybody. Some people thrive in that environment and others wouldn't like it because it's just not their path. So why would you compare yourself to the celebrity culture, which tries to say, for example, certainly in body comparisons, the false idea of thin is good or thin is the best, etc., might not actually be the case. So I would say don't compare to that kind of mixed up culture. And often if somebody is thin, very, very thin, it's at the expense of something else, and we all know about the celebrity convention, sort of confessions. Sorry, I was going to say conventions, but I suppose it is a convention as well as a confession, that they had an eating disorder. That those people were keeping their weight down by having a secret eating disorder. So that didn't help them, at the end of the day. So you don't want to be in lockdown going through all of that. You just want to forget that and don't compare. And, I wouldn't be going on any big diets or anything during lockdown that are complex to do with all of those bad body image thoughts, which at the end of the day is just the same as any other negativity that you would have about yourself. So don't compare, don't compare. And then number 7, and again, some CBT counsellors would put it at the top of the list, this one. But I think it's very hard if you are on your own and you don't have, you do need to have a phone call list, and you do need to have a list of people that will be there for you. And God forbids that you don't have that in your life, that you can't access somebody by the phone. I always make sure that I do have, and if I don't, I make a person that person, you know. And okay, they might only go with me so far on that journey, but I do, and I always would. And I've always known to do that because I was a counsellor of people who were in really difficult circumstances. So I know that you must do that. Okay, but number 7 is this one. I didn't finish saying it. Avoid people who create the problems by compounding them. So if you've got problems, don't go and spend time. Fortunately, in lockdown, you don't need to. So some people will thrive in lockdown because they've actually got rid of the people that were holding them back and compounding the problems. Sadly, human nature, there are some people who are said to the glory in other people's downfall. And you want to avoid them both in and out of lockdown. And I think it would be sad for people who, once they come out of their lockdowns, go back to smoking, go back to drinking, go back to all the bad habits, because they surrounded themselves by the people that they should have been avoiding in the first place. Right, okay. And I'm thinking it's very strange that the media are saying that in lockdown, people's bad habits are proliferating, because certainly if you are not with the person who's the enabler, then you're going to do that less. So I don't know. I would really like to examine the figures, the statistics, and I'll come back to you again with those statistics for lockdown and non-lockdown statistics of suicide, alcoholism, etc., etc. What's going on with that. Because I don't actually believe it. I think in lockdown, some people will have given up. Certainly, it's been easier for me to give up smoking on my own than go out and about and socialise with smokers. It's obvious. Number 8, I won't be with you much longer. I'm getting through the list. This one is the hardest one. And I think this is a lifelong process one. You might want to go through and be having a cognitive behavioural therapist for this one that I'm going to say several times. Because it might not happen just like that. And that is, if you're trapped in a bad relationship, it could be a bad marriage, it could be a bad job, a bad environment, like poverty, I would regard as a bad environment. You have to consider negotiating the outlets on that. As some people can't leave a bad marriage or a bad relationship just because of circumstances that surround it. So you have to negotiate your outlets. And an outlet is a very good word because it is giving the person an escape from that, not by going and having an affair, but by looking at other things that they can be doing that doesn't involve that relationship. Just because you're stuck with something doesn't mean that you have to spend all day long in that situation if you can't get out of it. So a feeling of being trapped is a problem for negative thoughts, and it's probably one of the biggest contributors to suicide is the feeling of being trapped. People really do need to deal with that, and a cognitive behavioural therapist will talk through that situation and, try and figure it out. That needs to be really figured out. Okay, and then aren't you glad that I'm going to shut up soon? Number 9. Ah, well, I did it for 3 years, so I do know what I'm talking about. Number 9. Don't give up that easily and always talk it out. So, don't. A suicidal thought or a negative thought is actually defeat. You accept the defeat rather than staying in for the fight. Yeah. So somebody who really wants to grapple with it would want to have affirmations that say, "Don't give up and talk it out." That's the 2 things. Don't give up and talk it out. And in fact, in suicide prevention, it's kind of obvious that you don't let that person alone. Okay, you don't leave them in a situation on their own because they're more likely to do that thing, right? So, you want to have avenues for people to talk, and you would want to be checking up on that person. There's an organisation that does a morning phone call. I think these sort of things are the correct things to guide that person to. Zooms, social Zooms, lots of spiritual organisations have their social Zoom. You'd be wanting people to join those and be involved with what you would call an active virtual life, where you can meet people through technology. Okay. And then last but not least, I put here this one, which I put lots of question marks with this number 10, because really number 9 would have been the encapsulated list. But I did think of it, which was, okay, what do you do if you've got no friends, you're alone, no parent who you can phone up, brothers, sisters, or old friends, right? You want to get onto your blower, your authority. It's like you want to say, okay, I'm feeling this way. Well, some housing authorities, some councils have, people that you can speak to. So you'd be wanting to speak to them. I'm not always a fan of, what is the local mental health person, and in councils and things like that, they come in different guises and different names. I'm sure the Samaritans are probably the right place to call in the event that you had no other person to help you. I've never actually tested that out, to go obviously, because I've never really, well, once in my life I did feel bad, but I've never tested it out to call them, so I don't know what they would be saying at the other end. Just you see what I mean? But I think you would want to go to the Samaritans and other organisations if you had no friends and family that you could gain support from. But hopefully, if you work through that list and you listen to this talk, you wouldn't have me in that position of number 10. And then there was an afterthought, which is what I heard from somebody else who's very good at helping people out, is number 11. Help people out. If you're feeling bad, one way of getting around those feelings of feeling bad and negative is to help other people out in their own difficulties and situations, and that helps you. Okay, so if somebody has negative thoughts, a thought of actually helping somebody else out helps them. And that's it, basically. That's what I would say to people is what to do. But I wouldn't ever regard somebody who felt that way as having a mental illness. And I think the media And sadly, my industry, my film industry, are the ones that stigmatise people more than anybody else about this issue. And if you speak to professionals who deal with statistics and are aware of epidemics of suicide, in places and in communities, like myself, who did it for 3 years, where it was my job to do it. They would be raising their eyebrows about that idea of ever stigmatising somebody with a mental health problem. It's not something you would think to do. So I hope people will watch that talk that I've done again, and I hope that it has recorded. And I wish you well this evening on a Saturday. I've done 45 minutes on that, which would be your standard cognitive behavioural therapy time with somebody. I hope you enjoyed it. I am not a cognitive behavioural professional, but I am trying to do a course with it, which eludes me because I do many other things, but I need to go and have that exam. So I'm what you'd call a lay cognitive behavioural therapist, who probably was one of the guinea pigs who helped them develop their theories at university level. Okay. So anyway, I hope you have a nice weekend. I hope most people who encounter this talk aren't feeling bad. And if you are, please do take my advice. Thank you. Good night, everybody. And maybe I'll see you again. I have it in my mind to do 6 of these talks about this issue. So I'll come back on this, and purely just to do it as a service, which has nothing really to do with my day job. If you liked it, and if you're interested in more of this, please do subscribe. That would be helpful. And I'll see you further along. Bye-bye.